My name is Alice, and I'm 42 years old. I work as a sales associate in a shopping mall. My husband, Ethan, is an office worker, and we were high school classmates. After graduating high school, we both moved to a big city for further studies, but eventually, we both ended up returning to our hometown due to various reasons. It was during that time that we reconnected and started dating, which led to our marriage. Now, we live in the town where Ethan was born and raised, and his parents' house is nearby. The neighboring town, where my parents live, is close to the urban area, but here, it's more of a rural landscape. Naturally, the social obligations here are quite significant. I knew there were many farms around, but I never expected the living experience to be so different. The neighborhood relationships are very deep, and even minor things become well known throughout the town by the next day. But once you get used to it, it's not a big deal. The real problem, though, is my mother-in-law. Ethan's family consists of his parents and his younger brother, living together. Being in the countryside and living nearby, frequent visits are unavoidable. I go to my in-laws' house every week, but it's nothing short of agony. Thinking back, my mother-in-law's attitude has been unbelievable from the start. When we went to their house to tell them about our marriage, Ethan's father and brother welcomed us, but my mother-in-law hardly greeted me and avoided eye contact. To her, I might as well be invisible, not even considered part of the family. This has been consistent since the day we first met. "Can I help with anything?" I asked, shortly after being shown to the room, as lunch preparations began, but I was completely ignored. The dining table was set with large platters of fried chicken and casseroles. Furthermore, when she placed an order for chicken and soup for 4 people, my mother-in-law finally took her seat. "Shall we start eating?" But, to my surprise, there was nothing in front of me. Not only was there no chicken or casserole, but there weren't even any cutlery. Even when asked by my father-in-law, my mother-in-law pretended not to know. "How odd, I definitely informed the restaurant of the correct number of people," she said. After being sternly reprimanded by my father-in-law, she reluctantly brought me forks and a small plate. Although my father-in-law offered me some of his portion, I declined, saying I wasn't very hungry. Even though everyone started eating lunch, I barely touched the food. Or rather, I couldn't. My father-in-law didn't say anything more. Ethan and his family continued to eat and drink as if nothing was out of the ordinary. I remember being speechless at the bizarre scene. Naturally, this led to a big argument between Ethan and me afterward. On the way home, Ethan drove me to my parents' house, but I was so disappointed that I could hardly say what I wanted to. It was shocking and frustrating to be treated so poorly by my mother-in-law from the very first meeting, even before our marriage. But what was even more disappointing was Ethan's failure to stand up for me. I started to doubt whether he was suitable as a marriage partner. Why hadn't I realized this before deciding to marry him? Maybe it's not too late to turn back. Sensing something was wrong, Ethan finally apologized. "I'm sorry, Alice. My mom is a tough person. If you defy her, she gets angry, and there's nothing you can do. But she doesn't mean any harm," he said. It seemed he was asking me to try and get along somehow. I asked him to stop the car and struggled to find the words. "Is this how your family treats first-time guests? If it's only towards me, I don't think I can get along with someone who dislikes me this much." Did Ethan really not notice his mother's harassment? She didn't even bother to serve me food, cutlery, or tea. Even his father noticed and pointed it out. I couldn't believe his obliviousness. If Ethan noticed it and did nothing, it shows a complete lack of consideration, which is appalling. I don't think marriage is going to work out. "Alice, please reconsider. I'll be more attentive from now on," he pleaded. He apologized repeatedly, but I decided to put off responding and refrained from contacting him for a while. After that, Ethan called me several times, but I ignored them, and then a flood of texts started coming in. The content was along these lines. He admitted his fault and promised to be more considerate in the future. He would always be present when meeting my mother-in-law to protect me. Together with his father, they would try to gradually change his mother's attitude. He mentioned making arrangements so I wouldn't have to visit his parents' house too often, considering I also work. The emails were filled with sweet words like, "I love you and you're the only one for me. I'll give you some time to calm down and think, so please leave me alone for a while," I replied. then stopped reading Ethan's emails for a few days. Then, I took the time to think things through. Ethan loves food and can't resist delicious things. Since the meal was served individually, maybe he was just focused on his own plate. Perhaps he was too eager to eat and didn't notice what was happening around him. He's not the type to notice the finer details, so maybe he didn't realize the severity of the situation. Ethan acknowledged his faults and apologized, promising to try harder in the future. The mother-in-law is a bundle of ill intentions, but it seems Ethan meant no harm. Maybe I should forgive him just this once. Looking back, I might have been worried about when I would get another chance to marry if I missed this opportunity. In the countryside, meeting new people is indeed rare. Since most of my friends were already married, I couldn't expect any introductions, and there were no new encounters. I think not only Ethan but also I was subconsciously fixated on getting married. At that time, I still had feelings for Ethan. And so, I missed my last chance to turn back, plunging into an unhappy marriage. Married life unfolded just as I had anticipated. It's laughable how ridiculous it was. My mother-in-law's sarcasm started even before we moved into our new home. Complaining about being informed late about the moving date, or that our greetings to the neighbors were delayed. While she completely ignored my existence, she increasingly made sarcastic remarks towards me. Her favorite phrase was, "You really are a useless daughter-in-law." As these words were directed at me, no one else reacted, and she continued to badmouth me. Ethan was utterly useless and said nothing to his mother. It's truly bizarre. You guys are out of your minds. At first, I was confused. She got angry for not preparing gifts for the housewarming, even though she hadn't told me it was necessary in this region. I hastily prepared them, but of course, she found fault with it. When my sister-in-law's family from the neighboring county visited, we all went out to eat, but she still harassed me. How many people are in your party? 7. Let's see, 1 child and 7 adults, correct? I couldn't believe she would do this in public. It was so embarrassing in front of the restaurant staff. From then on, she always excluded me from the count when we ate out, so I started correcting her myself. I stopped being silent when she excluded me from the guest list, even at dinners we hosted. How many in your party? 4. No, it's 5. All 3 men stayed silent. I felt completely isolated. Yet, when Ethan's younger brother decided to get married around our 3rd year of marriage, things remained the same. As a sales associate, I rarely have weekdays off. Unable to provide transportation for my in-laws' hospital visits, I was constantly berated for being useless. So, I used work as an excuse to avoid contact with my mother-in-law as much as possible. I would see her about once a week, usually for a short time. One weekend, after finishing work and returning home, Ethan said we should go to his parents' house. It's because his mother had something to discuss. Even though Ethan had informed them we were coming, my mother-in-law was in a bad mood when we arrived. We're about to have dinner. It's so inconsiderate of you to be late, what with work or whatever. Such a nuisance having an unreasonable daughter-in-law. We'll leave right after hearing what you have to say. Okay, then, what's for dinner? Roasted pork. Why don't you eat before you go? Here we go again. Anticipating this, I brought my own sandwich and drink. While Ethan's family ate their meal, I calmly ate my sandwich and checked social media, unfazed. My mother-in-law glared at me occasionally, but when I glared back, she looked away. What I learned about Ethan's younger brother's marriage was as follows. He had been dating a girl for many years, but the woman he was marrying was someone else. She was already pregnant. They planned to have the wedding before her pregnancy became noticeable, as per her wish, to wear several dresses. Both families wanted a grand ceremony. Really? At 40 years old, having an affair and a shotgun wedding, and now wanting a grand ceremony? This is the countryside. The ex-girlfriend, living not too far away, and their long relationship, were well known in the community. She must be around 35 years old. To be cheated on and abandoned by a boyfriend she was expected to marry must be so embarrassing for her. With a grand ceremony, many of her acquaintances would likely be invited. Do they really think these people will celebrate them? The thought of sitting in the family section at such a wedding is dreadful. On the day of the wedding, I think the only people who were happy were Ethan's family, including the bride and groom. especially my show-off mother-in-law, who was delighted with the large number of guests and the bride's multiple dress changes. She didn't forget to mock our modest wedding. The bride's family looked embarrassed and tried to stay inconspicuous. Since the bride was a junior at Ethan's younger brother's company, many of their superiors and colleagues were present. Imagine the humiliation of sitting in the family section of a bride who had a love affair and a shotgun wedding. In a close-knit rural community, that must be incredibly embarrassing. It might have been even more torturous than what I experienced. The wedding itself was terrible. Long speeches, vulgar entertainment, boring family stories, and disappointing food. After enduring the wedding, just when I thought I could finally go home, my mother-in-law wanted to chat with everyone. Let's stop for a cup of coffee. The cafe in the hotel lobby was crowded. There were many attendees from Ethan's younger brother's wedding, but most were residents or relatives from the same or nearby communities. That's different from the city. How many in your party? 8. The count included my in-laws, the bride's parents, Ethan's sister's family, and us, totaling 9. Exhausted and fed up, I decided not to correct the count as usual. Then I'll just be 1. With 8 people, we obviously had to wait. I was the only one immediately escorted to a table. Please, this way for 1. As I began to walk, I heard a ripping sound, and my dress tore, causing me to fall backward. Before I could understand what was happening, my mother-in-law was on top of me, swinging her hand down several times. You stupid daughter-in-law. How much more shame will you bring upon us? I quickly came to my senses, pushed her off, and stood up. Even as the staff and others restrained her, she continued to lash out at me. Eventually, my mother-in-law was arrested for assault on the spot. It seems the hotel staff had called the police. Dazed, I was seated on a sofa in the lobby and tended to. Here's a towel. You're bleeding from your mouth. Thank you. After that incident, Ethan and I got divorced. On that day, he just stood there blankly, doing nothing. I realized I had to protect myself. I hired a lawyer and negotiated a substantial settlement in lieu of pressing criminal charges for the assault. The dress that my mother-in-law had torn was a rental, so I got compensation for that too. I also received a modest alimony from Ethan as part of the divorce settlement. I heard rumors that Ethan's younger brother and his wife are also heading for a divorce. The parents of his wife, having witnessed the assault by my mother-in-law, were thoroughly frightened and advised their daughter to leave him. In the countryside, getting a divorce right after marriage is a huge scandal. But they must have felt it necessary, fearing for their safety. Ethan's younger brother and his wife are still discussing the terms of their divorce without ever having lived together. Rumor has it that she already has a new partner, apparently her ex-boyfriend. The baby born during their separation is said to resemble this ex-boyfriend. But this is all just gossip, so who knows for sure. As for my mother-in-law, she's become a recluse, avoiding public scrutiny. Although my mother-in-law did not have a criminal record, she was naturally treated as an ex-convict and a criminal in the countryside. With both her sons going through messy divorces, her family has become the laughingstock of the village, and their relatives are furious. I've rented a place near my parents' home and have moved back, continuing to work at the same store as before. I'm living peacefully and happily, supporting my elderly parents.